Looks like everyone's in.
All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Walk to Wellness. I'm Hartford Healthcare's Tina Varona, Director of Media Relations at Hartford Healthcare. Welcome to Walk to Wellness. Unfortunately, we are sorry that we can't be with all of you in person at West Farms Mall today, but with the latest COVID surge, we are doing the safe thing and being safe and holding today's event virtually. So we thank you all for joining us. Our topic today is digestive health, and especially a timely topic after the holidays that we've all had. Hope everyone had a wonderful holiday. But I'm happy to be joined by Jamie Aller. She's a registered dietitian at the Hartford Healthcare Digestive Health Center. Welcome, Jamie. It's so nice to see you, and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Tina. So glad to be here and talk about this today. I know is something that always stirs up good conversation, so I'm excited to be here.
My gut tells me this is going to be a popular topic.
I hope so. Nice one.
Let's get right into it. With lots to get to, but before we get into really the specifics about pre and probiotics and all that good stuff, let's talk about what does a healthy digestive health system look like? What does it entail? What do we need to do to get there?
Yeah, so I think, the first thing that comes to mind when people think about our digestive health are regular bowel movements. And so we're going to get into the nitty gritty here a little bit about that today, but it's something, we all have our own normal, so to say, but sometimes, after you've learned about the digestive system, our normal may not be optimal, right? So a lot of this conversation is about optimizing our diet to make sure we have a healthy digestive system, which mainly entails, having regular bowel movements, and that is usually on a daily basis, and minimizing some of those digestive complaints like gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, abdominal pain, and discomfort. A lot of those symptoms may not necessarily be desirable and also might indicate that something is out of line with our digestive system.
And, we're going to be talking about fiber and ways to improve those bowel movements. What is average? What is healthy for bowel movements every day? What should we be doing?
Yeah, usually, every day is probably a good place to start. Everyone is a little bit different. And so it's hard to make an umbrella terminology as to, exactly how everyone should be having in terms of bowel movements. But there is, daily is usually a good thing to aim for. And if anyone is that much curious about it, there's something out there called the Bristol stool chart. And if you Google that and just kind of look it up, it'll show you images of different types of stool and what's considered constipation, what's considered diarrhea, and what's considered to be more of like normal, regular. So if you're not, squeamish, we all do it, right? And so it's all a normal thing, but that's really an interesting thing to look at because you can kind of put yourself on a spectrum of what you might be dealing with if you're not sure.
Well, that's a good point, Jamie, because to have that chart readily available, because different stools and colors, and if there's blood or anything different, if it's dark, if it's different colors, that can mean other health issues. So it's really important to have that chart perhaps handy or know and to look at them. I know as it may not sound nice, but it is important because that can be sort of a catalyst for other things that could be potentially going on. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it helps us too to go into those conversations with our provider, having some information about ourselves so you can better describe what's going on. Because sometimes it's a difficult, uncomfortable subject to talk about. I mean, I talk about it all the time. A lot of our doctors talk about it all the time too. And so, but when you go in there, it can kind of feel sometimes a little bit uncomfortable. But if you have that information, you will better advocate for yourself too when you're looking for help and guidance from your providers.
So I do want to make a mention, if you folks have questions, I know this is a little bit different than if we are at West Farms, but if you do have questions and you know how to utilize the chat, ask your questions in the chat and we'll get to them that way. If you don't know how to use the chat feature, you can verbally ask your questions at the end. So I'll make sure to come to you if you do have questions at the end. Jamie, let's talk about fiber. Let's talk about ways that we can, get a healthy digestive system, and fiber is a big component of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So fiber is generally a non-digestible food component. And what that means is we don't absorb it. There's two main categories of fiber. There's soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Soluble fiber, think more of oatmeal and how that looks like. It really absorbs water. When you cook oatmeal, you see how it kind of turns into that jello type texture. It helps to bring water into our intestines and our stool to help have regular smooth bowel movements. It has some other benefits in terms of lowering cholesterol as well. It can also help control blood sugar levels. But within digestive health, it's really about bringing moisture into the stool. Insoluble fiber more helps to add bulk to your stool, so you can have a full bowel movement and your digestive system has material to be able to pass through your digestive system.
Let's talk about some foods, some of the food types that are rich in fiber that we could be using.
Yeah, absolutely. So mainly you're looking at your fruits, your vegetables, your nuts and seeds are great sources of fiber. Legumes like chickpeas, black beans, kidney beans, all sources of fiber, as well as whole grains. So things like brown rice, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, whole grains can be a really great source of fiber as well.
So how do you, if you're not so much of a fiber fan, how do you introduce that into your diet? And a lot of times fiber can be hard on some people in terms of their digestive system as well. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Absolutely. So sometimes, if you're in this conversation today and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I hardly eat any of those foods, you don't want to start tomorrow eating pounds of fiber throughout your entire day, because you're right, Tina, it can absolutely kind of go the other direction. So if you're not used to eating so much fiber, you want to introduce it gradually, and you want to make sure you're also drinking enough water alongside it. But if you're not someone who loves those foods, there are so many different ways to sneak it into things. And so, sometimes one of the tips you can think about is hiding vegetables within different recipes. So sometimes, everyone's seen like a bag of frozen spinach for the most part, right? When you have frozen vegetables like that, you can almost crush them down into a powder and then easily throw them into things. So you could put it in meatballs, you could throw it into soups, you could add it to scrambled eggs, you could try things like smoothies or protein shakes. That's a really great way to blend different types of fiber into your meals. So hiding it almost is not a bad idea. And also, like, thinking outside of the box, I think when we think of fiber, you're thinking about eating a lot of vegetables with dinner, but there's ways at every meal to add fiber. So they make really great like chickpeas. They make roasted chickpea snacks now that are dried and almost like a nut. And that could be a snack between lunch and dinner. You can throw flax or chia seeds into your oatmeal. You can, choose a whole apple for a snack instead of having a glass of juice. So sometimes, there's so many opportunities during the day to do something small. It doesn't have to be overwhelming.
You talk about masking fiber, but let's talk about labels, because how do we read labels where there might be fiber in it, but it might be sort of masked as something else? So how do we sort of read labels to say, well, it doesn't say fiber, but maybe there are ingredients in there that are fibrous?
Absolutely. So initially on a nutrition facts label on the back of a food package, usually probably more than half of the way down, you'll see something that says total carbohydrates. And right under total carbohydrates, you'll see dietary fiber listed. So that's where, if a food label is advertising it, you're going to see it right on there, and you're going to see how many grams of fiber are actually in that food. And that's why it's important to know, outside of packaged food, things like fruits, vegetables, when you're walking through the produce section, those don't have labels. So you don't necessarily know off the top of your head how much fiber is in that food, but all fresh fruits, all fresh vegetables will have fiber. And so those are something, even though they don't have a label, you can be sure of that you're going to get fiber when you're consuming those.
Jamie, I want to break away from our discussion and take a question in the chat from Jennifer. Is it recommended to soak chia or flax seeds prior to eating them? Thank you for the question.
Awesome question. So chia seed, you don't necessarily have to soak either of them. However, chia absorbs water really quickly. And so you can use it almost like a pudding. So a lot of recipes with chia will involve soaking it, and it becomes like a tapioca. So if you like tapioca, you'll probably like chia soaked in things. The one thing I'll mention about fiber is to get the most benefit from it, it should be ground. So although you don't necessarily need to soak it for the most part, you do want to find the ground flaxseed and not the whole flaxseed, because you'll get more benefit out of the ground version.
How do we make fiber swaps?
So a good starting place is to think about what you have in your house and how you can improve it. So let's say you're traditionally having white rice, make that swap to brown rice. Or if you have white bread, we can make that swap to whole grain bread. Snacking is another area where maybe we go for pretzels or chips or something like a Ritz cracker where you're not necessarily getting a lot of fiber, but going, instead of pretzels to nuts, or instead of having chips, maybe do some celery and carrots with your dip instead. So there's ways to swap out from those traditional snack foods to other high fiber options. It's a simple swap. You don't have to think much about it, but you're doing something to benefit your body.
And I like what you said earlier, Jamie, and I think it's important to mention again, is that to introduce this slowly, because,
Yeah.
If you're eating white bread and potato chips or pretzels, it's really hard to make that switch to maybe a whole grain bread or wheat bread or brown rice. It definitely is altering your diet. So I think it's important to take those baby steps and slowly introduce it, and you'll be more successful that way, right?
Absolutely. Even one thing a week, check one thing off your grocery list that you can work on. It doesn't have to be all tackled overnight. Try one thing, maybe just work on your breakfast or just work on your snack. You don't have to do it all at once.
All right, next up, I want to talk about probiotics. We hear a lot about probiotics and that they are good for you, but what are they? Let's just first break that down for the audience.
Absolutely. So to kind of understand probiotics, just an introduction to what our microbiome is. So our microbiome is basically trillions of live organisms that live within our body, a lot of them within our digestive system. And they're there to create a healthy balance for us. They help to digest our food. They can help to produce and absorb different vitamins. They have a positive influence on our immune system. And there's a mix of good bacteria and potentially harmful bacteria. They usually get along and there's no arguments and everything's okay. But every once in a while, it's stress, maybe medications, changes in our diet, things like antibiotics even, it can cause disruption in that level and that balance between the types of organisms that live in our digestive system. So probiotics come through either within our food or sometimes in supplements to be almost the police of the digestive system and help to make sure that balance stays in a healthy balance. So you're getting all that benefits from the microorganisms that live within our digestive system.
So let's talk about foods that are rich in probiotics. I know yogurt is a big one, but how do let's talk about some of the foods where we can find probiotics and how do we introduce them and increase them into our diets?
Absolutely. So yogurt's probably the big one, right? I think that's the one we all think of initially, but you're looking for fermented foods that have these live probiotics. So other types of fermented foods, sauerkraut is one of them that's great for probiotics. Kimchi, which is a fermented cabbage, kind of like a sauerkraut, but a different flavor to it. It can be a little spicy. Kombucha is a popular drink nowadays. You can find it probably in most grocery stores, and it's a fermented tea that has a lot of great probiotics in it. There are also fermented soy products like tempeh or miso that have natural probiotics in it as well. So there's a good variety of food, but yogurt's probably the easiest and most common one that people think of.
Good segue into Barbara's question about yogurt. She says when she eats yogurt with probiotics, she gets stomach cramps. That is a common occurrence. What do you say to that? Thanks, Barbara, for the question. That's a good one.
Really good question. So all yogurt will have probiotic. So if the issue with your symptoms are from the probiotic, it may, it might be worth you trying a different food source just to see, like try sauerkraut and see if you have that same response. Because I'm also willing to bet it's possibly the lactose in the yogurt that could be causing those symptoms as well, and maybe not the probiotics. So if you're willing to, maybe look for a lactose free. I know that Activia actually makes a lactose free yogurt. Lactose is a milk sugar that's found naturally in dairy products. So sometimes that can be the culprit to those symptoms.
I want to talk about supplements. When I go down the vitamin aisle and the supplement aisle, I am completely confused. And especially when it comes to probiotics, there are so many. And I just sit there and I try to read the labels, but it can be very confusing. How do you know which supplements are right for you? Is it a one size fits all, or does it depend on the person? If you can, try to break down the supplements and what we should be looking for when it comes to probiotics.
Yeah. So definitely a complicated one. And you're right, there's a lot out there to filter through. But what the research has shown is certain strains of bacteria or probiotics at certain amounts can have benefits in certain situations. So for instance, some type of probiotic might be really good for constipation, but it may not help diarrhea. So when you're looking for a probiotic, you really want to find the one that addresses your particular digestive complaint. And they won't always necessarily say that on the bottle. So that's where assistance from your providers, from a registered dietitian would come in handy. There's also a website called the US Probiotic Guide. And on that website, they actually have a summary of all the different probiotic supplements out there that have specific research to support improvement in certain situations. So, if you have a very individual complaint that you're looking to improve, a specific probiotic might help you. But if you're just overall trying to improve your digestive health, most people can benefit from focusing on food sources first, just to see how you feel. And if you're not getting improvement, that's where you can look at some of the supplements that might have research to support certain improvements.
I want to talk, Jamie, about sort of marrying the two. So if you have a diet that that is rich in probiotics and you're taking supplements, can you overdo it? Is there too much of consumption of probiotics? Can you do both, or should it be one or the other?
Yeah, I think there's room for both, but you need to kind of listen to your body and see what's happening. Just like we spoke about that question where, you have yogurt and we have symptoms from that. If you're having all of these food-based probiotics and then you add a supplement in there and you're not feeling any better, or you're actually feeling worse, it's worth probably taking a step back from the supplement and giving it a break and just seeing how you feel. And, sometimes there's situations where you might want to take a probiotic for a short period of time just to help heal your gut, but you don't need to take it forever. So maybe you're on a course of antibiotics and you're not feeling right, and you just want to continue with your food, but then also add a supplement for a couple of months, and then you can take it off of your regular diet and kind of see how you're feeling and adjust. So you can almost use them more specifically in situations where you might want to benefit from them.
That is a very interesting point. I learned something there.
There you go.
Yeah, for sure. Because I'm thinking, well, you take it every single day, but that's a very good point, and I like the way that you described that. It was very easy to understand. Probiotics, prebiotics. What's the difference there?
Prebiotics are the food for the digestive system. So you can think of pre as before. So that's the food that then helps our microbiome keep in that balance. So they're typically a fiber. So prebiotics aren't live organisms like probiotics, but they're more usually a source of fiber that we find within our food.
And so what are the benefits of prebiotics, and really what should we be looking for to maintain, really honestly, Jamie, this is all about balance. And I really think that this is a way that we all need to pay attention to what we're eating, how we're eating it, when we're eating it. as you mentioned, introducing especially supplements and when to sort of introduce them into our diets and when to stop them. But I think it's really all about balance here. Let's talk about some of the benefits of prebiotics.
So what prebiotics do is they really help to support the composition of the bacteria that live within our digestive system. And specifically, the research has shown that they actually feed the good bacteria. So it's not that they're supplying nutrients to all of the bacteria within our gut, but they really focus on the good ones, which helps to improve, again, like symptoms of gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea. It can improve bowel regularity, help to improve our immune system, even help with different absorption of vitamins and minerals. So it really, similar to what you see from the benefits of probiotics, you'll almost see a similar thing from prebiotics because they're helping to support your gut health overall.
And so how do we introduce them into our diet? How do we increase them? And really, what are they? What types of the foods are we talking about?
Luckily, if you're working on increasing your fiber intake, you'll likely also increase your prebiotics. And so that's sort of a good, you're getting two things done at once there.
We like that.
Yeah.
For one.
Exactly. But there's some specific foods that are a bit higher, garlic and onion, which are great. So those have high sources of prebiotics. Artichokes, avocado is another one, bananas, beans like chickpeas, whole grains. So you can kind of see the similarity. There are a lot of high fiber foods.
And as far as labels, going back to the labels, and I know for many people, I'm a big label reader. A lot of times I don't know what I'm reading, but I do like to see at least what are the ingredients that I'm eating or ingesting. So how do we determine that from labels?
You won't always be able to with prebiotics because it's not something that you see labeled on a label. But if you see any products with something called inulin, or that's probably the big one. Chicory root is the other one. So if you see chicory root or inulin, those are two sources of fiber that you often actually might see on probiotic supplements, protein bars, protein shakes, different cereals, breast milk formula even. So like some of those packaged foods will have it added to it as a supplement. It doesn't necessarily come naturally in there, but food manufacturers will add it to those products. So those are two keywords where you might then have an idea that you're getting something that does have prebiotics.
I know I do want to ask you about sort of the cleansing craze, if you will. We hear a lot about cleanses, 2-day cleanses and things of that nature. Are cleanses good, or are they something that should be done in moderation? What are your thoughts on cleanses?
There's some interest in fasting and sort of things like broth cleanses or, juice cleanses, because it gives the digestive system a break. So sometimes when it's overworked, people find benefit from, maybe even waiting to eat breakfast a little bit later, or some people will even go on longer fasts to try to cleanse the digestive system. There's no necessarily like strong research study that's been like, this is exactly what you need to do to support your gut health. So I can't say that there's strong evidence to support it, but anecdotally, some people will kind of experiment on their own and feel like they've benefited from it. And so, it's not me to say, what works necessarily or doesn't for individuals, but I think, again, balance, right? I think anything that you feel over restricted, that's not sustainable, that leaves you, feeling hangry and, upset all day, you can't necessarily maintain that for the long term. So even though there might be some short-term benefits, I think the best way to go about this is healthy changes you can stick with for the long term and keep up with to support your health.
Balance and in moderation, I think, are the key points as well. Jamie, I want to talk about some, we talked about labels and different types of foods, but putting all these foods together, let's talk about some recipes, some healthy tips and recipes that our audience might find interesting, where it does introduce the fiber and the pre and probiotics.
Yeah. So some of this just has to do with getting creative, right? Like we all know about yogurt and we might eat it for breakfast or have it as a snack, but you can use it in so many other ways. You can make salad dressings out of it. You could make dips out of it. It's oftentimes used as a mayonnaise replacement. So you can almost use it in like tuna salad or chicken salad or egg salad, something like that. Another thing to think about is doing something like a meatless Monday, where you have the opportunity to have more beans in your diet. You can use onions and garlic as seasoning when you're cooking up your beans, so there's ways to regularly kind of schedule in and plan for these days throughout the week that you intentionally get more fiber intake, more prebiotic and probiotic intake. And also what we spoke about before in terms of kind of hiding foods within different things you're already doing. Something we didn't talk about yet is pesto. I don't know if anyone is familiar with pesto, but it's this delicious sauce. It's usually like basil and olive oil and cheese and nuts and whatnot. But that's a good example of where, it normally just has basil, but you could throw spinach in there. You could throw handfuls of other greens in there. Like sometimes we can add more to some of our favorite recipes without you having to necessarily reinvent the wheel. It's just adding an extra ingredient that can improve that recipe slightly.
And I do want to go back to Barbara's question from earlier about the cramping. Is same thing with fiber. Sometimes that can be, I know we talked a little bit about that in the beginning, but if you should find yourself maybe consuming too much of something, then really listen to your body and maybe sort of back off a little bit, right? I think it's really all about balance and being flexible with your diet, because I think we all think, okay, well, if I take my vitamin every day, I'm good. But this involves some work. This definitely involves some diligence on our parts, right?
Yeah, and I go back to water again. With any kind of changes in what you're eating, just make sure you're staying hydrated and getting a lot of water in throughout the day. And if you're also not sure what's causing the symptoms, something to think about is a food journal and recording what symptoms you're having alongside it. So you can maybe map out, every time I have onions, I'm noticing this bloating. It can really point you in the direction as to what might be triggering different digestive issues.
Which brings up a good question from Carol. She says that she gets an upset stomach when she drinks a lot of water. Is there anything she can drink instead? Could that be too much water perhaps she's drinking? Or
I would say,
Carol.
Yeah, of course. I would say slow sips. If you're using straws, if you find that you're guzzling, or if your water's really cold, you could maybe kind of back off and do more room temperature water, or a little bit, again, like small sips throughout the day rather than really trying it all at once. And generally non-caffeinated fluids are better hydrating. So if you're looking to replace water, you don't want to replace it with, soda and coffee. You want to replace it with maybe try herbal teas, or sometimes there's different flavorings for water that might make it easier to tolerate for you. If that's maybe a little lemon water or something like that, that might help as well. But I'd say herbal teas might be the next step, just to give it a different flavor and see if that helps at all in terms of not making you feel as uncomfortable.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think the room temperature water is big. I sort of pour a glass of water the night before, leave it out, and then in the morning add some lemon to it, and it's room temperature, and it goes down really easy.
Yeah.
But that cold water, unless you're really thirsty, can sometimes be a little bit hard to swallow. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Any final tips for our audience today? This has really been an incredible conversation. I have learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers have as well. But any final tips as we go about and embark on our fibrous prebiotic and probiotic journeys?
I think just, kind of look at where you're starting at. And like we said, just pick one or two things to work on and just see how you feel. And, if you ever have questions about supplements, I would definitely, if you're not sure where to begin, go to your provider, look for some help, try not to do too much of that on your own if you're really not sure about what you're looking for. But in terms of your food, just take it slow, take a couple things little by little, and you'll get used to it. It'll be normal. And then you could go to the next thing. So don't feel pressure to do it all in one sweep.
It's great advice. And I think the two words to take away here are balance and moderation.
Absolutely.
Anybody else have any questions? I don't see any in the chat, but I just want to open it up to anybody who may not be able to use the chat. If you have a question, if you want to ask it right now, that's fine too. Just want to make sure we answer everybody's questions. But I really think that you did such a wonderful job describing everything. And I know I learned a lot. And I think we pretty much covered everything. I don't see any other questions. Jamie, I want to thank you. This was really beneficial for you taking the time. And I'm sorry, again, we couldn't be there in person. Hopefully next month, things will be a little bit better and we can see all of you at West Farms Mall. But Jamie Aller is registered dietitian at the Hartford Healthcare Digestive Health Center. Thanks for spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
And for all of you, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. But for now, as always, be well.